Hi folks, Rob Flux here from Property Developer Network. Coming to you live once again for a Sunday session. I've just dropped my glasses and these are not the right ones. So allow me to get the correct ones and then I can see what's going on. One of the troubles in getting old and having some last minute technical difficulties is being in a little bit of a rush trying to come live to you today. So before we get into the episode today, it's all about preparing an information memorandum, or what is called an IM. But before we do that, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping and let everybody know about some upcoming events that we've got coming on. And I guess by far the biggest news is that next weekend is our 7th birthday. That's right, we've been silly enough to be running our monthly networking group called Property Developer Network for 7 years now. And our event on the 17th of August in Brisbane will be us celebrating that. We will be celebrating that, I guess, in each of the states, Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, but the Brisbane event is the, I guess, the big shindig. And we will be announcing also as part of that the winners of our winning our annual membership for everybody who has been promoting the Property Developer Network, I guess, group over the last little while as we come up to those celebrations. Other events that we've got going on, we've got in Sydney and we've also got in Melbourne, we've got our 2-day event called the Psychology of Property Development. That event is very squarely aimed at trying to get you to understand and choose what is your core development strategy. It's an area where a number of people actually struggle, is actually locking down that development strategy. And from there, we're going to help you to actually build a 5-year action plan that sits in and around that. We look at that from a number of directions. We look at that from a property development sense, and we also look at that from a mindset sense. And we have a look at some of the things that stop us developing our action plans, stop us from pulling the trigger, some headspace issues, some limiting beliefs, and a number of other things that might actually sit in there. So if you don't know where to start in property development, if you don't quite know what your development strategy is and you're flipping and flopping and not getting any traction, then I highly recommend the Psychology of Property Development event. So in Sydney, it will be the 24th and 25th of August. And in Melbourne, it will be the 7th and 8th of September. So anyone interested in coming to that at all, I will get, I can see Shelley is on, so I'll ask Shelley if she could pretty please just put the link in for the Psychology of Property Development in there. That would be great. I can see a couple of people coming online. So Shelley, Margaret, Vanessa. Vanessa says, hi. Hello, Vanessa, how are you? Vanessa also says, I have a question about dates. Well, I'm going to predict what the question is before I see that come through, Vanessa. And the I guess the dates are the 24th to 25th of August in Sydney, and the 7th to 8th of August in 7th and 8th of September in Melbourne. So hopefully that answers that question. Otherwise, feel free to actually post the question in there. And there's the link from Shelley. So thank you, Shelley. I appreciate that. Vanessa's question: when do the webinars, group coaching calls start for the property development formula course start? Very good. So Vanessa, the main event for, so the Psychology Property Development is the lead up events. The property development formula workshop is actually the 11th to 13th of October here in Brisbane. And the webinars start, I guess, on the month after that. So but we can start the coaching call, and so all the group coaching calls and that sort of thing start after that event. You should have actually had some emails to that effect in your inbox. If not, we will make sure that you get something on Monday. But yes, I guess a good segue to say that we are also doing intake at the moment for our property development formula program. So anyone who's interested in that, please feel free to reach out. Today's topic is I guess, how to prepare an information memorandum, or what is called an IM. Now, before we go too much into preparing one, we should probably really talk about why you would actually have one. And there's a number of different reasons why you would actually have an information memorandum. Effectively, what it is it allows you to describe in a great level of detail your particular project. And you may have different versions of your IM depending upon the audience that you actually want to read it. For example, you may want to have a version of the information memorandum that you're going to give to the bank in order to get bank funding. You may also have a version of the information memorandum that you give to any investor who might be lending you some private money. You might also have another version of that if you have people that might be interested in purchasing some of your stock off the plan or something along those lines. And so each version of the IM would actually have slightly different information in it. Obviously, you need to be able to select, pick and choose what some of that information is that you're actually going to be releasing based on who that audience is. So be cognizant of that. What I'm going to walk you through today is some of the high level headings that you would actually have in there. I'm not actually going to share an entire template with you, but I guess the people that are in my property development formula course will get one of those. But for the rest of us, it's really going through the high level line items to say what would be covered or what you should actually be covering in that. I can see a couple of other people that have also joined. So can see Michael, Adrian, Deb, Paul and Carol. So welcome all folks. Good to have you on board. So as I said, information memorandum is going to have a couple of different reasons for being, but I guess when you're going through the gist of the IM, I guess the intent here is to give the audience member who is reading it enough information about your project that any question that they have with regards to their point of view that they're reading it from can actually be answered. So if you're giving it to the bank, then the bank needs to know that everything that you have provided them, they don't need to ask you any further information. If you're providing that to someone who's investing with you, then similarly, it's going to be dealing with most of the frequently asked questions that they would be wanting to know in that process. So let's go through a little bit about some of the topic headings that you would actually have in here. So firstly, you should always have a bit of a summary overview as to what that audience member reading the document is actually going to be able to get out of the document, and the high level items that actually dictate, well, not dictate, that high level summary items that actually states the outcome that you are wanting that person to actually obtain. So for example, if your audience member is the bank, then you would have a little bit of an overview about the project and say that you are seeking funding from the bank in order to fund the project and how much money you're actually seeking in that process. So in a couple of paragraphs, it's nice, easy, short and sharp for that audience member reading that IM to actually know exactly why they are reading the document. The last thing you want them to do is get to the very, very end of the document and still not quite know why they're reading it, because in many instances, they won't actually get all the way through to the end. So that's the first part of the process. The second part would be have a little bit of an overview of the project itself. So what is the development? Why are you doing it? Is it a subdivision? Is it a townhouse project? Those sorts of things. Are there multiple stages in it? Is it there a stage 1, stage 2? What you may actually be doing at each of those stages. So for example, a project that I did a couple of years ago had a two-stage project. It was a 3-lot subdivision in stage 1 and I guess an 8 townhouse project in stage 2. So we excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. Hopefully I muted that just in time before the world got to hear that. So as I said, stage 1 was a 3-lot subdivision, stage 2 was a 8 townhouse project. And so we were able to articulate what each one of those stages would actually be doing, how long the timelines were for each of those stages, what our money requirements were for each of the stages. In that instance, I was funding stage 1 myself, and I was seeking some assistance in funding of stage 2, and that they could actually see that as part of the process, at the end of stage one, we were adding some soft equity into the process by executing the first stage. So that's the development overview. So you want to walk through what that involves. So if you're going to be demolishing, then you tell them that you're going to be demolishing. If you're going to be relocating or sliding a house and doing a reno, then that's what you tell them that you're doing. You want it to be very clear, very succinct, that the audience member reading that document knows exactly what it is that they're actually going to gain from knowing about that project. The next thing you do is tell them a little bit about the area that the project is actually being in. So the project location. So in this instance, you're going to be talking about its physical locality to other amenities. So how far away is it from the local shopping centre? How far away is it from major bus, train lines, those sorts of things? Are there any other features within the community that are worthwhile? You know, walking distance to a cafe precinct, or you know, just around the corner from an Aldi or a Woolworths or something along those lines. How close it is to hospital precincts, how close it is to universities or work, or those sorts of things that might be an attractive reason why that particular area might be an area that they want to invest in. Next part would be, as part of that, you'd be looking at what are the council upgrades and amenities that are actually happening in the area that are actually trying to justify why that location is actually a good area to be investing in. Next line item that you'd be talking about would be your timelines for the project. So how long, I guess, the project is going to take and where you are. So what are each of the steps and each of the stages along the way? So you would be, for example, talking about we're going to firstly do a DA stage. That we think that's going to take us about 4 months. From there, we're going to go through to a building approval stage, and that's going to take us another 3 months. Then we're going to go take that out to tender and I guess get builders to come back. That might take us 6 weeks. Then we're going to have that tender awarded, go through some pre-sales. So you're going to step out each of those timelines, each of the steps, each of the stages that are actually going to happen in that process. Some other things that you would be talking about would be, what is the finished product actually going to look like? So have you got any specification, schedule of finishes and those sorts of things for the project? I guess if you're doing a construct, for example, then have you got the full spec for, you know, what are the tiles going to be? What are the flooring systems? Those sorts of things. So that anyone who is reading the document can actually say, well, if I'm lending money into this and you're telling me it's going to be worth something at the end of the process, then they want to know categorically that the money being invested is actually going towards a product that is worthy of investing in. So they can actually very clearly and visibly see that. It's also going to help massively if you've actually got some, especially if you're doing a construct, if you've got some rendered images to actually talk about what that is going to look like. You know, if they can visually see it rather than just textually see what the outcomes are. If you've got any floor plans of anything that you're going to construct, those sorts of things also go on there. If you've had an independent valuer already review the project, then you should have that valuation, or at least an extract of that valuation attached into the IM as well, so that the bank manager or the investor who's thinking of investing in the process can see that it's not just you making up numbers, but that you have actually got some justification as to how and why you think that. You'd also put into there some comparable sales. So what are the other things that you've had both on a purchasing of the raw site? So what have you got that's comparable in that instance? And what have you got comparable in the sale of the finished product? So it's very clear that the valuation that you've come up with and the valuation of the independent valuer, if you have provided one, has actually got some substance, and that there's actually enough activity in the area to actually justify how and where those price points have actually come from. A butterscotch liqueur this week, folks. just for something completely different. If you've done any off-the-plan sales, then you would be talking about what off-the-plan sales you've actually obtained, how you've actually gone and obtained those, what your marketing campaign has been that sits around that or is about to be, depending upon what stage you're actually in the process. Typically, an off-the-plan sale would involve a little bit of a discount from a price point of view. However, that's not always the case, but quite often if you're selling off the plan, that is. And that's largely because the person who is buying it isn't 100% sure that what you say you're going to build and what you actually build end up being the same thing. And also, they are not sure from a crystal ball perspective whether or not the market's going to go in the right direction. So they always hedge their bets a little bit in that regard. So when you're selling off the plan, that can actually be quite challenging in order to do that. If you're depending upon who your demographic are, you would actually be have some statistics in there in and around your demographics. So are you trying to attract young upwardly mobiles, for example, or are you trying to obtain people who are students, for example, or maybe older generation where they're going to age in place? Depending upon who those demographics are, you want to have a look at you want to show the demographics of the area, some ABS statistics, a couple of other graphs, etc., to actually justify that the target audience that you are trying to put into your development happens to be the exact same demographic that lives in that area. So there's justifiable reason that that project is actually worthwhile. If you're looking for an investor to invest in you, whether that be through a business-to-business loan, which we discussed on some of our previous calls, or whether that be in a joint venture capacity, then you would actually be talking about what it is that you actually want from that investor. You'd be talking about what the proposed structure might be, how that would actually sit together. Would that be a company? Would it be a trust? Would it be a unit trust? Would it be discretionary trust? What sort of security you'd be offering them? All those sorts of things. So, for example, if you're doing it as a joint venture, then you would be roles and responsibility of each party. You'd be articulating when money is required, how often money is required, how much of that would be equity, how much of that would be serviceability, and how much of that would be liquidity. And you're very clearly able to articulate that. You'd also document what the anticipated returns are. Now, it's very important that you can't guarantee a return in any instance, because I guess nothing is 100% guaranteed in this world. And so you can actually get yourself in quite serious trouble with people like ASIC and the ACCC if you make guarantees. But you can talk about anticipated returns. You can talk about the interest rate that you would be giving them and the level of security that you're putting over that. So would it be first mortgage, second mortgage? Would it be a caveat? Would it be a personal guarantee? Those sorts of things. So you're going to be very clear in how that's actually put together. Next one would be answering any questions that that investor might have of your project. So where is the money actually going to be used? So if you're asking for cash to be used in cash on. I'm just seeing that I've got some internet problems here, folks. I'm hoping that my broadcast is still coming through. Let me just do a very quick sanity check. Can I get a thumbs up from people just to see whether or not they're getting any feedback from me? I can't see any thumbs up. Am I still there? Can anybody still see me? Okay, I think I've lost internet connection here, folks. I know I'm seeing a few thumbs up and a few smiley faces, a couple of grumpy faces. So I'm not sure if that means that I'm actually gone or not. I'm going to keep talking, and hopefully the recording is still coming through. I guess time will tell. Actually, I can see a few people now responding. So whatever it is starting to come back. So I can see a question here from Annie. So I'm going to answer that. Is an IM similar the same as a prospectus and a disclosure statement? So Annie, it's similar in concept. The difference is I guess the legal definition of those. So a prospectus and a disclosure statement would typically be issued by someone with an AFSL license who is actually trying to, I guess, seek funds from complete strangers in an open market using an AFSL license, so Australian Financial Services license. And IM is really a private document that you would share in a one-on-one basis, whereas a prospectus is something that you would actually have on public display for the entire world to be looking at. I can see a couple of other people have joined. So Alex, Andrew, Dean, Ivan, Kat, and Adrian. Deborah's got a question. In terms of demographics, how would you show an area undergoing regentrification? So that's a very good question. You'd be showing some statistics from the Australian Bureau of Statistics showing, I guess, the trends over time. And you may show some recent projects that have actually happened in the area that are outside of yours that would actually justify how and why things are being rejuvenated in the area. So, you know, is there a Bunnings going in down the road? Is a brand new Woolworths? Those sorts of things. What is the council doing with regards to road upgrades and infrastructure spends and all those sorts of things? Ivan says all good here. That's great. Vanessa says you're on, so that's great. So clearly a few people are saying that it's fine. My end, it's still indicating that I've got some internet problems, folks. So I'm just going to keep on powering through, and hopefully it does work. I've got a lot of people saying keep going. Tony's also joined. Welcome, mate. And Deborah says Q continued. As ABS data can be quite old. Yes, Australian Bureau of Statistics data can be old. It's done every 4 years. I guess the most recent one was only done about 18 months ago. So that data presently is actually quite accurate. But they're not the only people to be gathering statistics. So you can actually get that from a whole range of places. So there are people like microburbs, and those sorts of places that actually go and collect data themselves off a range of places and collate that together. So I would be trying to get data from a range of places, Deborah, but it's more particularly, I guess, between you and Annie's questions, trying to find all of those answers, put them into one succinct area to show what has historically been there and what is currently actually happening in the area. By combining those two areas, what you'll see is a little bit of a trend as to what's actually happening in the area. Would you recommend a solicitor prepare the IM? No, Annie, I would not recommend a solicitor prepare the IM. Solicitor would prepare any investment documents and those sorts of things that you actually put together. If you were doing a prospectus or a product disclosure statement, then absolutely you would have a solicitor either prepare them or at least review them. But because of that subtle difference between the legal standing of those two documents, you're not sending an IM out to the world. You're not putting it on public display. You're not putting that, on your website for people to download. You're actually having private, independent conversations with people in a one-on-one basis. And should they meet your criteria and there's an interest, then you would share the IM at that point. So hopefully that makes sense. Michael has joined. Welcome, mate. Kat has got a question. Do you put a call to action in the IM, i.e. pay a deposit? That's a very good question, Kat. I guess it really comes down to the intended audience of the document. As I said right at the very start, there's a couple of different audiences that would be wanting to read that. That call to action would go in those first couple of paragraphs that I mentioned right up front. So the reason why they are reading that document and what it is that you're wanting them to do. I always do that right at the very start rather than at the end of the document. So it's very clear what the intended outcome is from that process. Tony's got a comment. You're coming through fine, Rob. Loud and clear. Keep going. Very good. From my end, it's a little bit clunky, folks. We've just had a recent NBN upgrade, and I think it's a little flaky, so my apologies. Deborah is saying the internet is cutting in and out. Sorry. My apologies there, Deborah. Some people are clearly getting it and others aren't. Michael says, what are some must-haves and differences to an IM when you're selling raw or with a DA? So that's the other, I guess, another reason that you would put together an IM is if you're trying to do, I guess, a deal finding type situation and flicking the project on for a finder's fee. That's the other reason for an IM. So good segue there, Michael. I should have mentioned that right at the start. You'd put the same sorts of information. What you would consider also putting in there, Michael, would be a feasibility, assuming that you've done one. If you're trying to justify flicking it on for a finder's fee, then you need to be able to justify to the other person how long you think that project's going to take and what the costs are that you would think would be involved. I would put a word of caution in there. If you are not an expert in putting in that particular strategy and you're not 100% sure in your feasibility numbers, putting a feasibility in can actually be detrimental if there is an error in it. Because people will go, this guy's a joke, or this guy or girl is a joke. They don't know what they're talking about. They've made a very simple error. And so whilst it's advantageous to put the feasibility in, if you are not, I guess, an expert in doing that, either engage somebody who is, or alternatively, maybe selectively think about not putting it in and let the person picking up the site that you're flicking it to make their own assessment. That said, if your intended audience member happens to be the bank, then the bank absolutely needs to see a feasibility. So that, that's a non-negotiable, and so you would go to hell and high water to make sure that you've had somebody to review that feasibility and make sure that it is 100% accurate in that process. I did mention there are a couple of other things that you would be answering if you were seeking investors. So I'm just going to touch on a few more in those. So what would you do? So what if I don't have all the money that you need, for example? So you might have an investor who is wanting to invest with you, but they don't have enough money. So would you be taking multiple investors, for example? Now, personally, I prefer not to take multiple investors. There are times where I have to, but that's just a personal choice. And that's really because you're spending a lot of time, I guess, looking after the investor and those investor relationships. And that can actually burn a lot more time in some instances than actually running the project. And so my preference is to always find one investor that can actually look after the entire deal, and preferably a sophisticated investor who doesn't trigger any of the ASIC or ACCC type legislative challenges there. Also, you want to ask and answer some typical questions that you're thinking that they might be asking you. So what if the project doesn't progress or go through to completion? What's going to happen halfway? Or what happens if the project stops midway? There are always things that can pop up along the way. There can be delays in the building process. There can be delays in other funding. The market could change. So you want to be talking about some of those, I guess, potentials, what the risk is, what you've actually done to try and actually mitigate that risk as well. Another question here from Annie. Would you recommend listing your previous projects and profile? Absolutely, and I'm actually coming up to that, Annie, so very good. I guess the next one I would list would be my development team. So who are the people in and around me and supporting me? So not only would I do a little bit about my own profile, but I'd also do who are the people around me. The challenge is if you're doing your very first project, your previous projects don't exist and your profile is, at this point, limited in scope in what you can actually do. So you would be concentrating very much on what your development team is. So who is your builder? Who is your town planner? Who is your civil engineer? Who is your architect? You want to show, if you've got a mentor over the top of you, and I highly recommend that you should, who is that mentor and what is their involvement in this particular project, so that people who are investing you, if they know it's your first deal, they know that you've got a solid and successful team that are sitting around you to try and actually support you through that process. So yes, absolutely, you should put that in there. Development timelines. I think I've touched on this one already, but what are the steps and the stages? How long are they going to take? What are you going to be covering at each stage? What are the milestones that you will actually be using as success points before you go to the next stage? Trying to think what else. I had a number of other elements that I wanted to put in there. I might just, whilst I'm having my brain come back to me, might see what other questions there are. So Vanessa says, great tip, Rob. Thank you, Vanessa. Don't know which tip that was, but hopefully it was all gold. So I guess whilst I gather my thoughts, folks, if you've got any questions at all, there's always a little bit of a time lag between what you write and what I read. So please feel free to add your questions in here, and I'll try and actually come around to actually answering those. I think I've covered the gist of most of the things that you would actually be putting in an IM. It's really trying to make sure, in summary, that the IM is tailored to the audience that you're actually intending to have read it. And so, for example, a project that I did, I guess, going to say 7 or 8 years ago, I'm just having a look at my my folder now, and I actually had 8 different audiences that I actually prepared that for. So I prepared one for the bank. I prepared one for my solicitor. I prepared one for my sales agent. I prepared one for an investor coming into the process. I prepared one for the valuer who was actually going to read it. And I also prepared another one for people who are looking to buy off the plan. So it's largely all the same information. So I create one master document, and then I do a save as and just remove elements of that document out that aren't relevant to that particular audience. And so that made it very easy, I guess, to try and articulate. It also helps you to paint a picture and a story about in and around your project. Oh, the other one that I wanted to talk about was exit strategies. So you should always list your exit strategies, and you want to say what your preferred exit strategy is, and then what plan B, plan C, plan D is should they actually eventuate, and what some of the trigger points might be as to why that would actually be executed, for example. You would also highlight any known risks and what you've done to try and, excuse me, minimize or mitigate those risks, so that you can actually understand what actually is being done. So, for example, one of the risks might be that the market might move, say 5% or 10%. So you would be saying in there, well, we've actually stress tested the feasibility, and the feasibility is still profitable at, if the market shifts by 10%. So if that happens halfway through the project, we will still be able to complete, we'll still be able to make money. We won't make as much money as we thought, but we will still be very profitable. So you would put things like that in there. You'd be identifying what some of those issues and challenges are and how you've actually gone about it. That helps the reader to actually understand that you are professional, that you are thorough, that you know exactly what you're doing, and that you've done all that there is possible to actually identify and run the project with as much success as you can. So that being said, that was kind of the intent of what you're going to cover in an IM. I can't see any questions coming through at the moment, folks, so I'll just give you a couple of minutes to put your last questions in. And whilst I'm waiting for those to come through, I'll just do a very quick review of some of those upcoming events that we've actually got coming on at the moment. So next week in Brisbane on the 17th of August is our 7th birthday for Property Developer Network. So that's going to be a normal regular monthly event in the afternoon, but we're going to have a little bit of fanfare that sits in and around that. And for anyone based in Brisbane who are wanting to learn how to start in property development, we're running a one-off special event in the morning, so you can make an entire day of it by listening to us talk about property development and then go into the afternoon session. So 17th of August, how to start in property development in the morning, and the regular meetup in the afternoon. Then in Sydney and in Melbourne, we've got our 2-day psychology of property development events coming up. In Sydney, those dates will be the 24th to 25th of August, and in Melbourne, that will be the 7th to 8th of September. So those events are really trying to get you to actually lock down and understand what your development strategy is. Make sure that you're not spinning your wheels by trying to do too many things at once. Lock down your development strategy, lock down your area, understanding what some of the limiting beliefs that you might be holding on to that are actually stopping you from succeeding. So, I can't find a deal, or I'm afraid to pull the trigger even when I do find a deal, those sorts of things. How do I do it when I've got no money? So all of those things we're going to be pulling apart and I guess breaking them down, giving you tools and techniques to try and actually deal with those and put you back together again. And then lastly, the Property Development Formula Program formally kicks off on the 11th to 13th of October as well. So those dates are the ones coming up. I've got a question here from Carol. Please confirm the time for Brisbane next Saturday. One Facebook notice says 9 a.m. Another one says 10 a.m. Okay, that's... I'm going to say that it's a 10 a.m. start, Carol. I think the 9 a.m. one was because we were doing events in Sydney and Melbourne with a 9 a.m. start. So clearly we've actually, I guess, done a typo on one of those. So 10 a.m. for Brisbane, absolutely. But feel free to turn up at 9 a.m. and have a coffee. I'll be there setting up the room. You can always come and say hello. I'll have a large flat white. Thank you very much. So that said, folks, I can't see any other questions coming through. So I'm going to give that a bit of a wrap. So thank you very much for listening to me once again. Stay tuned for next Sunday when we have another one of these Sunday sessions with the topic to be announced next Friday afternoon. Until then, folks, bye for now.